It's time to go on the record with WRAL News.
Thanks so much for joining us for On the Record. I'm Lena Tillett. How did we get here? To this crisis within Durham Public Schools. We're talking about a month full of protests, call-outs, passionate school board meetings, even children unable to go to school. It actually started like this.
Greetings, I am Dr. Alvira Lassane, Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources. I am excited to share with you the results of the Durham Public Schools Classified Compensation Study. You have been patient and anxiously waiting, and the moment has arrived.
All classified employees will have an increase. Finally, legacy steps for existing employees will largely be maintained. However, new employees must submit appropriate verification forms to be awarded steps for experience outside of DPS.
This really pleasant video was sent to DPS employees back in October. You heard it there briefly. The raise is applying to a category called classified staff. That group includes physical and occupational therapists, instructional assistants, cafeteria workers, and transportation staff, excluding the drivers. It affects roughly 2,000 employees in DPS. The HR superintendent there mentioned a compensation study by an outside consulting group, but it was DPS's job to determine what was actually feasible in their budget. So again, let's take you back to October. The classified staff were told they would get sizable raises based on their experience both in and outside the district. Well, then came January 12th and 13th. That's a Friday and Saturday night, by the way, where district employees got very different emails. One employee shared it with us. It says, quote, "A recent audit of salary payments made since October of 2023 has revealed that errors were made when assigning employees to their correct step on the new 2023-2024 salary schedule. And as a result, some employees, including yourself, were paid at an incorrect higher step." So again, we're back at the question, how did this happen? Why did it take months to notice that the district's numbers were just off? Students have lost 4 days of school because of protests. The chief financial officer has resigned. And then the bombshell, the school's very well-liked superintendent, Dr. Pascal Mubenga, resigned. Moments after that happened, he talked to me exclusively about why.
I'll say this, my apologies to the Durham community. Our kids, our families, they deserve better. It's very unfortunate that we get to this point. But there are a lot of great things that we have at Durham Public Schools, and we have qualified folks with a good intent and good folks that will be able to continue this work.
So right now, the DPS school board has been wrestling with 4 options to try to right the ship here that will inevitably leave some people unhappy. Tonight, our panel will take us through this unusual and disruptive pay debacle in DPS. WRAL's Durham reporter Monica Casey has been at nearly every DPS rally and board meeting over the last few weeks. Eric Hauk is an assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill School of Education. Part of his expertise includes local district school finance policies. Okay, spot on. And Heidi Jo Hetland is a physical therapist at Durham Public Schools, again, part of classified staff. Ms. Hetland, I'd like to begin with you. Obviously, this directly impacts you. You've been a physical therapist now for 30 plus years. You've been with DPS, though, for the past couple of school years, correct?
Year and a half.
How did you feel when you learned that you'd be getting a sizable pay raise?
We were all elated. It was just kind of a relief to be able to make some plans with that and to feel that our salaries were more competitive with the physical therapy market in general. So yeah, we were all very excited and to feel like we were recognized and valued and paid what we were worth.
What was your understanding at the time of why you were getting the raise?
That there was a compensation study that served to make sure we were being competitive on the market, to fix some compression that was in the middle of the scale, and to compensate others, for longevity with the school. So that was done, and then these numbers we got for our raises were the result of that study.
Okay, and if you can tell us, I know I said a 20% pay raise is what you would be getting, or that's what you have been getting, I should say, since October. Practically speaking, I mean, how does that higher pay help you in your life, everyday life?
For me, given my age, it helps me plan better for retirement and to just go ahead and take care of that, and a little more cushion to take care of some medical bills and some things like that. So for me, it was just the planning ahead with that.
So then you get an email on January 13th. You shared the email with me, got it at 11:47. That's a Saturday night, saying that essentially your raise was being revoked.
Right.
How did that feel?
It numbing at first, just not really sure that I was reading that correctly, and then just kind of, heart sunk that what is, just kind of shock and disbelief, and how can they possibly change my steps? That's changing the terms of my employment. Like, how can they just do that? And how can they just change my salary like overnight like that? With like, seemed blindsided to just get that out of the blue in the middle of, pretty much the middle of the night on a holiday weekend.
Did you think it was almost an error, the fact that you got it on a Saturday night?
I think from some talk of, some things happening and the hints of it in the news, there may have been payroll error, so I thought something would be coming, but I didn't realize that's what it would be. So the amount of the change in my step and my salary definitely were a big shock and unexpected.
So tell us about the step. You went from where to where?
I was on 33 based on me being a licensed physical therapist for 33 years, and since I've only been with Durham Schools for a year and a half, I'm now at step 1.
33 to 1.
Yeah.
Was that insulting for you?
Very, very much so. Very much. That's a lot of hard work that, the therapists come in, and we may have worked in hospitals or home health and gain a lot of valuable experience that help us be better therapists in the school. So they were just kind of devaluing that and saying pretty much whatever you've done before you've come to DPS doesn't count.
Monica, you've been at some of these rallies and protests, many of them. The frustration and the anger is real. Describe what you've been hearing and what you feel in terms of where people think that they plan to go with DPS moving forward.
Yeah, I think Heidi Jo covers it really well with that disbelief that a lot of people felt. There was a feeling of elation when they got these raises to get them up to that market level. And the protests that I've been at, people are frustrated. There's almost a sense of panic. I've heard from people who quit a second or even a third job when they got that raise, thinking, I only have to do this one job now and I can make ends meet. So a lot of panic. I also want to point out the number of parents we have seen at these protests. Of course, this is about classified staff, but we have seen Durham families, parents even bringing their children who might have been out of school that day to participate in these rallies. Sometimes it's after school at the school board meetings, and we've seen certified staff, teachers coming out to support their coworkers and colleagues. In terms of what's next for some of these employees with DPS, we have heard from people who have said, I'm done. I'm going to go somewhere else where they're going to count my steps. There was a man who spoke at a school board meeting and told them the next day would be his last with DPS, and that he had found other employment and would be gone on Monday. So the impact of this really can't be overstated.
And Ms. Hetland, you said something to me that frankly broke my heart. A lot of these instructional assistants and PTs work with children with varying abilities. And just thinking of a family that gets used to a teacher that works with their child who may have special needs, the threat that they would leave, that must be really difficult.
Yeah, and these students that are in special programs, they stay in the same classroom for years. They don't move from year to year, so they really do become like a family with the teacher and the instructional assistants, get to know the parents, and they get to know the children. And so, yeah, it's really hard when just and I've had, instructional assistant leave who was very close with helping to do the things that I trained them to do in the classroom and just helping this child. And because of this, she's left, and it's just really heartbreaking. And I just hope every day when I go into school that, that all the people are still there. And if, I certainly would respect if they've decided to leave, but it's heartbreaking when I find out that very valuable employees are gone.
That plays such a critical role. Professor Houck, help us understand what this compensation study was trying to accomplish specifically for classified workers.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's commendable that there was even a focus on classified workers. Most of the time when we're talking about salary issues in the school finance and policy context, we're talking about certified staff, teacher raises, teacher bonuses, and teacher steps. So even paying attention to classified staff was a virtuous initiative. The issues that Heidi brought out are clear. So a lot of classified staff come in from outside of school systems with external experience. And one of the key questions is, how do you value that experience? Monetarily, how do you value it? One of the studies originally said there were these compression issues where somebody would come in with, say, 10 years of experience outside of the school system and make the same salary as someone who had 10 years of work inside the school system. And that was a pressure point when they did interviews with some classified staff. So one, just the level and amounts of money, because classified staff do have other options in private sectors and other public sector work. Over time, the trade-off that we've assumed with public sector employees, that they get better benefits in terms of retirement and health care after retirement, those have been willed away a little bit. For example, state employees no longer are guaranteed health care in their retirement by the state of North Carolina. So the playing field has been leveled. Other public sector or nonprofit and private industries can put more competitive leverage on folks who work in these classified positions. So it's been very hard to staff classified positions, especially coming out of the pandemic. And I think the study was designed to address all of these issues at once, sort of an omnibus approach to make a series of policy changes, implement them all at one time, and then have a salary schedule that the system and the district could use for years into the future.
I want to ask about how DPS compares to other districts in terms of experience. We do have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the real world impact of revoking salaries in DPS and what that will have on workers' lives. I want to talk about the norm within school districts in terms of how they value experience both in and outside of districts. Professor Houck, is DPS their attempt to try to value experience outside the district, is that normal? Was that something that was unrealistic to begin with?
It's not outside the norms, and could be considered a normal practice across districts. So many districts will take Some districts will take a one-to-one approach. Some districts will take a fractional approach, say 2 years of outside experience will translate to one additional step. And other districts just rely on state verification processes to certify the experience of the classified employees. So in this space where there's a lot of local money and local policy making, there's a range of options for districts.
Okay, so Monica, after all of this turmoil in the district, the board gets a law firm to basically do an investigation to figure out what went wrong, why their numbers were so off. Tell us what the main takeaways were for you in terms of this report that was released.
The report really showed a breakdown in communication between finance and HR, essentially the left hand not talking to the right one. The CFO, Paul Lasore, according to the report, asked the consultant that he was working with to run the numbers, including all years of service with the salary study. How much would it cost? They came up with $20 million. The report says he then told them to rerun the numbers and only count state years of experience. Then they came up with $10 million. So that's the difference that we're looking at. He took that $10 million and ran with it, making the budget for the rest of the year. This was back in February of 2023. So for months, the school board was told it will cost $10 million to implement the salary study. And when I say implement it, it means essentially give those raises, that they thought that price tag was $10 million. Lasore realized there was an issue in November, according to the report, and employees got that email in October that the raises were coming. So pretty quickly, once they started paying, they realized there was an issue. He informed Superintendent Mubenga, who then informed a couple of members of the board in December. It was 2 members who happened to be in the office. He came across them and said, "We have a problem. I don't have the numbers yet, but we'll deal with it after the holidays." That got us to January.
Okay. So they kicked the can down the road, but suddenly it was incredibly urgent. Can you explain that kind of confusion there?
I think that's one of the questions that's not really answered in the report at this point. There was a desire for Lasore and Mubenga to communicate with the consultants when they realized there was an issue, and the consultants also did some investigating into what had happened. So we have some of that information as well, but in terms of why something wasn't done immediately, I think that's $1 million or $10 million question at this point.
Professor Houck, what stood out to you in that report?
Well, and I think relevant to this question, school districts are not the federal government. They can't run a deficit. And so there are some real time pressures brought about by the fiscal calendar of, you have to land the plane, and column A and column B have to be in agreement, which speaks to that. I think also seeing in the report that there was some lack of communication, knowing that through the pandemic, one of the things that's happened is that school districts have prioritized sort of classroom instruction and really thinned out the ranks of central office administrators. And I don't know this for sure, but it feels like everybody in the central office was carrying a pretty broad span of control with a lot of direct reports. And that's the first thought that came to mind when I read the Tharrington Smith report.
Ms. Hetland, I guess just on a practical level, again, this is impacting you. This is affecting you directly in your bank account. Do you give DPS grace for apparently not getting their math right? Or is the genie out of the bottle? I mean, once they start giving you all higher salaries, and you've gotten it now since October, that's what you expect moving forward.
That's a hard answer. I think we realize you can't, squeeze blood from a turnip, some people said, and there's not money, but also DPS workers made plans. Like Monica said, some people quit extra jobs, and so people had plans with that money, and so now they're kind of stuck. I understand DPS doesn't have the money, so it's hard to decide, it's hard to demand that salary that they promised in October when we really know they don't have it. And I feel the board is trying to look at solutions for that. But just not only that, but just there was this no warning, no policy, the blindsidedness of these emails out of the blue on a holiday weekend with no real clear communication with us. Like, is this a policy change? How has this happened? And you saw, the beginning of the email, sorry, there was an error, you were overpaid. And really taking away all WRAL, those steps is very hurtful to all the classified workers that we've worked so hard so many years, and now they just wipe them all away. So I think the money is an issue, but also the steps and the respect that come with that, and then reestablishing trust, if that's even possible, that they're not going to do this again. And what can we trust in the future if they say our salaries are this? Are they really going to continue to be that?
And feeling valued as an employee there. That makes a lot of sense. We have much more to get to. We want to talk about the options that the board is considering. Stay with us. Let's just get through the options and see how much time we have left. I feel like by the time Monica's done, it's like 2 minutes. Welcome back as we continue our discussion on the salary debacle happening within DPS. Monica, the board right now is considering 4 options to try to remedy the salary issues. Take us through these 4 options.
Well, so we saw 2 of them a couple of weeks ago, and the board couldn't agree on them, so options 3 and 4 came up. I'm going to refer to my notes to make sure I'm getting everything correct, but option 1 essentially puts us back in that January email that Ms. Hetland here received. It gives no credit for out-of-state or private practice experience, and it keeps the salary study, which gives everyone at least a 4% raise. Some people got much more. Option 2 eliminates the salary study and the raises that it had. It gives credit back for the outside experience and restores salary steps, and all employees get an 11% raise. Option 3 is similar. Instead of 11%, it's a 15% raise. And option 4 follows suit, giving credit for all of the salary steps, a 15% raise, eliminating the salary study, and keeping February paychecks at that higher October rate that people were receiving. The board couldn't agree on any of those options, but at their last meeting, they did vote on that February piece. So the February paychecks that people are receiving will be the same as that October rate. So they had a short-term solution through this month, but questions remain about what's next.
Okay, so Ms. Hetland, of the 4 options, do any appeal to you?
No, they do not.
Is one even close to appealing to you?
I think any of them that just give a flat rate are discounting the problems that the salary study was trying to solve. And it also makes some of my coworkers and teammates settle for a lower salary than they would have gotten on another one. Some people are still getting the salary they were, or close to getting the salary they were going to get in October. And so this is asking them to take a lower one so some of us could get a higher one. So none of those feel good to me, and it is very important to us that we get our steps restored, because that is really important to us.
So I mean, what's the board to do?
That's what they're working on right now, I hope, by taking 2 weeks to work with the comptroller and the investigators and gathering more information. And hopefully over this 2 weeks, they've had a lot of time to consider their options, look at the budget, where other money can come from. So I'm hopeful that they're spending these 2 weeks coming up with some other options.
Do you foresee a situation where, for those that like what the particular option, they may stay and people who don't may leave the district?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's already happened, and I'm very nervous about what that means if they, with an option that they pick. Any of those options could make people leave.
What do you make of the options, Professor Houck?
It's very difficult. This, we can talk about Durham Public Schools as its own entity, but it's in a labor market with some very powerful school districts. I think the interim superintendent, who had some experience in a neighboring county, said at her press conference, we were nervous about losing people to Durham, right? And other districts are looking and trying to match or exceed these pay rates. It's very, very competitive. It's a very tight market. I think a general rule of public policy is if you give somebody something, you don't take it back. So I think that's a first principle of kind of good governance, if you're able to float that cost, right? And that's another factor of putting pressure on the system that they have to think about.
I did want to introduce something else here, what the state could possibly do. And the interim superintendent you just mentioned, Caddy Moore, and also a board member talked about that. Let's take a listen.
I think that, school systems have really complicated and comprehensive financial systems and controls. And so it's important to take a look at what's working and what can work better.
And we also have the board member, because she said something interesting about the state.
We need to be clear about the physical reality, and the state is not coming to help us.
When she said that, I thought, well, what can the state do?
I think that's an untested question. So the state has its own set of policies for the payment of classified employees. And those rules and regulations can be waived if a district has its own comprehensive plan, which Durham does. So it's a policy and legal question if the state would have any authority to put money into a pay system for classified employees that doesn't adhere to its own regulations, given that it's superseded. There are emergency cases where states can come in and float school districts. That's usually happened in other states. North Carolina has a very particular type of regulatory environment that would make such an act fairly difficult, but not impossible.
This is hard to watch, and definitely for you, Ms. Hetland, because I'm thinking of all the hard work that you've put in your career all these years. Best of luck to you. Thank you so much for joining us, Monica. Professor Houck, thank you for joining as well. As a reminder, the school board will be voting on what to do at their February 22nd meeting. You better believe WRAL will be there covering every second of it. Thanks so much. Have a great night.